This is a mini long stitch bookbinding tutorial, and I'm going to show you how to do mini long stitch bookbinding with the tools that I provide. I make these kits and sell them on my website, senselessart.net. First thing you're going to need is a bunch of tools. You're going to need a ruler that you can use for cutting, X-Acto knife, a bone folder. If you don't have a bone folder, the back side of a butter knife works really well. A pair of pliers. I have some hole punches, although if you bought the kit, the holes are already punched in the leather. You're going to need a hammer. The folded pages, the ones in the kit are folded pages of watercolor paper, 260 gram. You're going to need some waxed thread for bookbinding. You're going to need, very important, a paper clip, and you're going to need a needle that can work with the thread that you have. In your kit, you should have the outside part, the cover binding, and it will already be marked with the holes that you're going to use for the book. You'll also have a long piece, and that long piece is the tie for the end of it. If you're making them yourself, then you're going to need the hole punches. If you are not making them yourself, if you bought the kit, it's a little bit easier because the holes are already punched for you. All this information is in the show notes, plus a link to my website where you can buy the kits themselves. So the first thing you'll need to do is to cut off a length of thread. For this, I use about 60 centimeters. For these books, which gives me a lot extra and doesn't leave me playing thread chicken. I used a wax linen thread because it's the easiest thing to use with bookbinding. It's nice and sturdy and it already has wax on it. The wax allows it to slide through everything easier and to be more stable when it's finished. Tie a knot in the end of the thread once you've threaded the needle and leave a good 3 centimeters as a tail. So have a look and see you've got your signatures, and you're going to take one of those signatures and mark them with a pencil according to the holes you have in your binding. Now if you're doing this on your own, you're going to have to do your own measurements and things like that, but this is what we do. A method that I found really helpful to poke the holes in is to just use an eraser and poke it through so that it goes all the way through the item. You can also use a piece of foam, but I find the eraser is a bit more stable, especially when you're using thicker paper like this watercolor paper. Poke all 4 holes in it, and the first signature is ready to sew. Go in through the top hole and in through the top hole. It doesn't matter whether you start on the right or left side. Go in through the top hole. Pull it through. This is why you need the pliers, because this is often quite difficult. A pair of pliers is really helpful, and you only want 1 knot in that. Pull it through to the outside, pick up your paper clip, and then go through the same hole to the inside again. Okay, so you end up with a loop on the back side which your paper clip is holding. Now you can be quite forceful with this thread. It's a nice strong wax linen, braided linen thread, so you can be quite strong with it. And don't be afraid to, make it do what you want it to do. Sometimes you get things stuck on the paper clip. The paper clip is there to hold that loop, which is going to be very helpful in the next step. You just have to trust the process at this point in time. So go back in from inside to outside and continue to thread. You want that nice long stitch that the book is known for on the outside. Now it's a miniature book, so the long stitch isn't very long, but it's still longer than the other stitches. And this is, again, where pliers are helpful, although I'm stubborn, so I don't always use them. Go inside to outside, outside to inside, inside to outside, and you should be at the end of your row. Because this is such a small book, we can only really put 1 stitch into it. Sometimes I put multiple fancy stitches, but not for this one. Lay your book down flat It's very important to lay it flat and then pull it tight. It's important that you pull it tight after each row. That tightness needs to stay in there. Next step, next signature, mark it with your pencil. Put your holes in using your eraser. I just use the needle for this. You can use an awl if you want to, but this is only 2 pages of watercolor paper, so it's not so difficult. I do kind of give it a little bit of a bend to give that hole a little bit larger. And poke all 4 of those holes in. Now your thread is on the outside, so you're going to go outside to inside, pick up that signature, and it's fairly intuitive how you sew this line, outside to inside, inside to outside, giving that nice long stitch next that the binding gets its name from, and then outside to inside, and inside to outside. Making sure that you poke through the right holes. It is kind of easy sometimes to get things, and take your time to make sure that your paperclip isn't in the way, that your thread is in the right place. Lay it down flat, pull it. Again, you can be quite forceful, and now that paperclip is going to come into play. So you're going to pick that loop back up again and make sure that the loop doesn't get lost. Poke the needle through the loop that the paperclip has created, locking that stitch and locking that top part. That way the book won't come undone as you're working, and it won't come undone later when you're using it. Mark the next signature. Notice my double jointed thumbs. Poke your holes in it, get it ready for sewing. And continue on with sewing that in. At the end of each row, there's a lock stitch or a throwback to the previous row, just to make sure that everything stays nice and tight. If you don't go back and do that, your pages can loosen up and it can be a little bit less satisfying. Though in these small books, they really do hold very, very well. It's still best to lock everything as you go along. So you go outside to inside, inside to outside, that nice long stitch where the book gets its name from. And I'm really stubborn and I don't use the pliers. So you can be quite forceful with that thread and just making sure it's nice and tight all the way through. Now there's a point where it's too tight and it will tear things. And I admit that I'm quite practiced at this. I've made hundreds of these books, so I can do it quite easily. But do take care and pull slowly. Outside to inside, inside to outside. And then we're going to make sure that all the threads are tight. Again, flatten it out, pull it. And now we're going to do a lock stitch, going back and pulling that last stitch over. So it goes underneath it and it locks it in, and then you're ready for the last signature. Mark it, poke holes in it. There should be a better name for that, shouldn't there? There should be like a holing it, or I don't know, whole pokination. Clearly I'm not great at making up names, new words on the fly. Poke your holes in, You see me making them nice and round now because I'm too stubborn to use the pliers. Yeah, that's me. And you do your last signature, and you'll notice with this outside to inside, pliers. You could just use the pliers. No, won't use the pliers. I have to make my thread a little bit longer on the one side because the tail of that is getting in the way. Inside to outside. Long stitch. Now I make these out of leather, but they can be made out of other things like felt, but it tends not to be quite as stable in miniature form. I use leftover leather from the fashion industry, which is easily available in the town that I live in. I'm not saying that these are easy to make. They are time consuming, and certainly making the original forms is not easy, but I do enjoy making them very much. Okay, so go inside to outside for your last stitch, and you'll notice that your stitch, after you pulled it tight, is on the wrong side for the knot that you started with. So we loop it through and just sew across. And I like to loop it through a couple of times just to make sure it's nice and tight. It does make things a little bit fatter on that bottom piece, but anybody who's noticing that probably isn't really your friend. And then you go all the way across to the original piece that had your knot on it, and you go back through that hole one more time. Try not to pick up the thread as you're going through. Try and make it so that you're not stabbing through that knot, because that can cause problems. All the way through. Will she use the pliers? She will not. No, apparently not. We're just going to fight our way through that. Okay, you get through that last part, and you can take out that knot if you want to, if you're really keen on doing those sorts of things, but I usually just leave it in. Make sure everything's nice and tight, and I tie a double knot. I don't remember what it's called. I think it might be called a hitch knot, where you tie it one way and then tie it the other way. Tie it nice and tight. You take your bone folder. You take your scissors and you cut it off. Make sure that you don't cut it off too close to the knot, although it would be satisfying to do that. Take your bone folder or any flat object and give it a good squish, and that's where the wax in the thread really comes into play. Then just kind of give it a little wiggle to make it sit more properly, because I have tightened everything really, really tight. Take your extra piece of thin leather, and that just goes through the hole. You make a knot with that. And squish it. Now, usually I squish this with a hammer, but I didn't want to mess up my recording because it tends to shake everything too much. So I've just squished it. And that goes through the knot in the back, and that winds around the book itself and just tucks into it to finish it off. And there you go. You've made a miniature book. Well done.